Good morning, dear friends, and welcome to the Main Object Big Book Study of Alcoholics Anonymous. I am an alcoholic. My name is David. Hello, hello, hello. As always, a blessing to be here with all of you, and we'll get started. I'm going to ask my friend Dave R. I just have to find, there it is, to read the preamble.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dave, and I am an alcoholic. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety.
Dave, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Um, and now, if you would all join me in having a moment of silence for the still suffering alcoholic in and out of the rooms, followed by the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So, welcome. Good morning, everybody. And as I think most of you know, we are a line by line big book study. So, we go very slowly through the book for the purpose of really unlocking the book's potential to, when we're talking about the big book, of course, Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, to serve as a what many of us have found to be a powerful tool for sharing this message. And the extraordinary thing that I found was that when I started going to my first line by line big book meeting, after a number of decades sober, it created a renaissance for me in the program. It was all new, and that's extraordinary. So I hope to share some of that with you today. Our format is we're going to cover about 2 pages today, hopefully. Up until about 7 o'clock, I'll share a little bit on that, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments and your thoughts and so forth. Um, the meeting today is going to be recorded as we do, and we post it on our because we have a YouTube archive. And there'll be a link in the chat where you can access that in case you miss a meeting or you just want to review some of the things that we talk about. Also, just FYI, the recording process actually stops at 7. So you don't, if you're wary about having your own voice or comments recorded, we don't do that here. And just FYI, I sort of skipped over this, is that one of the things that we do as well, just to help us really dig into the text, is we categorize it as we go along according to, there you go, you see the 5 categories right there, along with the highlighter colors that I use as I go along. So we have questions, directions and explanations, promises, warnings, and history. And we've got a little bit of almost everything today. So we'll see that as we go along. And that information will be in the chat as well. One last thing I often forget to mention this is that I do send out a weekly text reminder message that has the link to this meeting, has the link to the archive as well. So if you want to be on that weekly list, just leave me a chat message with your cell phone number and I will put you on that. And so turning our attention to the text, uh, this morning we are on page 65 of the big book. We're near the top. So, just to summarize, Bill has really introduced us to the process of doing a moral inventory. He's convinced us that a searching and fearless inventory is critical to our sobriety, as well as our overall happiness. But now, what he does is as we're going to see, he gives us very concrete directions for undertaking this process of examination. As he shows us, the inventory begins with our list of resentments, and that's what we're going to be focusing on today, the resentment list. He tells us almost from the beginning to put aside any lingering emotional charge or feelings we have about these, what he calls grudges, and we just list them out in a very systematic way, noting next to them the areas of our life where we felt the underlying injury, and pointing out that, yes, indeed, the world and its people were quite often wrong and quite often harmed us. But he quickly jumps in and says, okay, but we need to go deeper. And we need to redirect our attention to look more closely at the destructive impact we've caused ourselves by holding on to these long past harms. And Bill then points out that perhaps our greatest loss is that we abandon or never pay attention to the process of maintaining and growing our spiritual experience. And that in and of itself is probably one of the greatest things that helps to ensure our sobriety and our happiness. So it's now critical that we use the list as a tool that allows us to transform our attitudes towards past injuries and instead begin to employ a more compassionate and prayerful approach to those who once caused us harm. And so, with that in mind, let's look at our text. And again, as I said, we're on the top of page 65. And if you've got your text there, you see we have the list in the middle of the page, but I'm jumping up to the paragraph before that where it says, on our grudge list, we set opposite each name our injuries. And that's direction, that's green. And when he says grudge list, now you see, we have 3 columns on the page. However, FYI, if you've ever been through this process and you follow what the big book says, even though we have 3 columns here, if we are setting up our inventory page, what we want to do is create 4 columns, because we're going to add a column in another 2 pages or so. It directs us what to plug in there, and we'll get to that next week when we talk about what gets in column 4. But for now, the first 2 columns, the leftmost and the one right next to that, that's considered the grudge. And the grudge is the person on the left I'm resentful at, and then the cause, what they did. So what we're doing is we are listing them. Now I have heard, I'm not going to prescribe a specific direction that you move in. When I did my 4th step, especially the most recent one, I was given directions as to how to do that, and I don't want to do that for you, only because I think that's between you and your sponsor, and I think it's really important that whatever process that the sponsor gives you for that is probably good for you. So what I did is I went across for the first two columns. And so, like in this instance, I would have written Mr. Brown and why I am upset or sore at Mr. Brown, and his attention to my wife, told my wife of my mistress. Brown may get my job at the office. So, but once again, I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's go back again to the top paragraph. Because what are we looking at here in the injury list? So I'm writing Mr. Brown, the reason, and then look at the questions. Was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sex relations which had been interfered with? So we really have 5 categories that things can fall into: self-esteem, security, ambitions, personal relations, or sex relations, which I guess you could think of as a subset of personal relations. And that's what goes in the third category. So you can see there, for example, with Mr. Brown, the attention to the wife impacts for him, for our individual, sex relations and self-esteem. And you can see fear bracketed there. We will touch on that next week because that's a little further down on the text. So obviously there is fear associated with when our friend thinks of that resentment, it brings up fear for him or her. I'm guessing it's a him, talking about the wife. Next line down, told my wife of my mistress. Sex. This impacts the sex relations, self-esteem, and again, more fear. Brown may get my job at the office. I think it's wonderful. You know, it was actually, I don't know about anybody else, but it was a couple years of going to big book meetings and reading through the list that I started to see the story behind what was going on here. I just thought it was a like a random listing of resentments, but you've got this little drama unfolding about the job, the mistress, the wife, the house. You could wouldn't it be great if there was like some like soap opera or something that started out like this was the pilot episode right here. But like I said, it took me a while to connect the dots there and see that story. So let's look at Mrs. Jones, because there is a what I think is an important piece of direction here. Mrs. Jones, she's a nut. She snubbed me. She committed her husband for drinking. He's my friend. She's a gossip. And that affects my personal relationship, which I guess is with the friend, and his self-esteem. And maybe fear. Who knows? He doesn't say what the fear is attached to. But I want to go back to the middle column again, or the cause column. And one, again, a bit of direction that I was given. If you count the number of words in that cause, depending on how you count the contractions being used, there's 18, 19 words. What I was told, and this was just really helpful, I mean, and this isn't law or in stone, but it helped me. And that was when I was listing out my causes to limit myself to 18 words. And why that was important to me, for me, was that I will delay telling you about my resentment, but I will speak all day long about the context. You know, it was sunny out. I had just checked the mail. My bank statement was in it. And they didn't send me my free pen, so I was in a bad mood about that. Oh, and then by the way, I stole the neighbor's, I don't know. I stole his front lawn element or ornaments. Something, I don't know. I'm being silly. So, and then the employer moving downward. The person, and again, here we go. This is the next chapter of the saga in the soap opera here. The employer is unreasonable, unjust, overbearing, threatens to fire me for padding my expense account. The nerve of that employer. And that impacts self-esteem, security. And then my wife misunderstands and nags. I guess the wife just doesn't understand why the mistress is justified. I don't know. She likes brown. Wants the house put in her name. And then that of course impacts pride, personal sex relations, and then security. And again, we see fear. Fear is bracketed almost next to everything there, or certainly every resentment. I don't have, like in my book, I don't like highlight the whole chart, but I do, what I do is I just took my green highlighter, pardon me, for directions, and I just did a vertical line down the chart just to show it as direction. Obviously, it's an example of the action that we should be taking. FYI, for a long time, I avoided, like, I resisted doing a chart. I thought, this isn't going to get at it. This is not going to be effective. And so I bought, and I'm not slamming anybody who has a guide or anything, you know, if you've used a guide. I mean, I think for my first one, I used this Hazelton guide, and that was, you know, that it got me in the process. Okay. But what I will say is that most recently, when I did my most recent inventory, I did the chart and I did it exactly as it's laid out here. And let's just say I had a little bit of contempt prior to investigation, because once I did it and I actually used it and I was given direction on how to actually go through the process, it opened up this whole world to me that I just had dismissed prior to that. So let's look at the bottom of 65. We went back through our lives That's direction. The three lines at the bottom of this page are all direction. We went back through our lives. So, what does that mean practically? What that means practically is, if you want to be very systematic about it, that means that the chart starts now and we move back. Meaning, what's going on right now, or what's going on most recently? Where do we have a grudge? Where do we have a resentment? And I don't know about anybody else, but also part of my alcoholism was becoming slippery with accountability. So, how I avoided inventory for a long time is I would say things like, well, I don't have resentments. I'm just a little frustrated with the person. Or I'm unhappy that they reacted to me this way. Or I don't resent him. I just think he's a jerk. And so I would play with vocabulary. Basically, it was any kind of you could call it negative judgment, and just insert whatever severity you want. But it was all the same to me when I laid it out. We went back through our lives. So we started the most recent, and for me, I did not, especially since what was I? I was 59 years old when I did the most recent inventory. I wasn't going to rely on my 59-year-old memory. So what I did was I used tools to go back through my life. The first tool I used, quite frankly, is I used my Facebook. This doesn't bode. What I'm about to say doesn't bode well for anybody else I'm Facebook friends with. But I used my Facebook friends list, and I just, okay, what's there? Or I looked at the Facebook groups I was associated with, and and then I went through address books, and I even looked at yearbooks from high school. And so, in all seriousness, what I did is I used tools to go back through my life because, as we'll see, nothing counts except thoroughness and honesty. And that's our next sentence. And when we were finished, we considered it carefully. So we've had these three columns. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at it. Now, everyone may have a different reaction to their list once they have it on paper. But Bill is giving us very specific direction on a new attitude that we need to adopt toward what we've put down. The first thing apparent was that this world and its people were often quite wrong. Now, we could laugh and we could debate about the mistress and Mr. Brown and Mrs. Jones and all of that, and I think it is very humorous the way Bill lays it out here. But I know that some of us, a lot of alcoholics have experienced trauma. A lot of us grew up in alcoholic homes or very dysfunctional homes or homes with mental illness, and so there is wrong, there is harm. And it's not a question of having, the right attitude towards it. Let me take that back. It's not a question of if we have a right attitude towards it, that stuff will disappear. I'm not saying that. But what Bill is saying is that, okay, we'll allow that the wrong, a genuine wrong happened to you. But for most of us, what that means is that we then in turn get locked in or invested in a particular type of victimization or a mindset. And what Bill is saying is, okay, it happened. Let's develop a new attitude towards it. The rest of this paragraph is warning because it talks about how we get on shaky grounds with, especially with the genuine harms that are done to us. And I'm going to say this, and this is not to slam at in any way another fellowship or 12-step program. But what we're going to read right here and is one of the key ways that I find that at times our sister program, Al-Anon, differs from Alcoholics Anonymous, or at least the direction that we are given, or I'll just be more specific, some of the things I hear shared in meetings. I don't have a problem with Al-Anon. In fact, I've attended Al-Anon and I've found it invaluable. But when I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous, I stay focused on Alcoholics Anonymous and on our way of approaching harms and resentments. What that means is that the section we are about to read is what, unfortunately, I often find gets lost when people bring in things from other 12-step programs in order to make sense of past harms. And I think we need to go back to what our book says right here. So anyway, moving forward, to conclude that others were wrong was as far as most of us ever got. The usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us and we stayed sore. Sometimes it was remorse, and then we were sore at ourselves. But the more we fought and tried to have our own way, the worse matters got. As in war, the victor only seemed to win. Our moments of triumph were short-lived. And what he's talking about there is the more we fought and tried to have our own way, what I think Bill is referring to is really trying to, what I've been guilty of sometimes, building a coalition. And what that means, that's a fancy term, it means a harm has been done to me. That's not where it ends. I want to construct a committee that will assemble and support me in the wrong that's been done. So, and then what I'm trying to do is have things my own way. I'm trying to bend reality. So moving forward, and I think what we're going to do is we're at 7. I'm just going to jump to this next paragraph, and then I think what we're going to do is break there with the text. Charlene, I see your hand. You are muted, my friend.
I could wait till you're finished.
Okay, thanks. It is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. And so, and futility means uselessness. And I have that, a state of uselessness. To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander, which means to use wastefully, or frankly just to waste, the hours that might have been worthwhile? But with the alcoholic whose hope is, now listen, here we go, folks, the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. And just in case we're in doubt about what grave means, Bill really hits it home with the next sentence. We found it is fatal. Let me ask you, I'll take a page out of my friend Robbie's book here. He's done something similar at times right now. Just raise your physical hand if during your time in Alcoholics Anonymous, you know someone who has left our fellowship because of a resentment. I see a lot of hands up. Okay. We found that it's fatal, for when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns, and we drink again. And with us, to drink is to die. It's a pretty dire warning. And with that, why don't we do this? Because we've actually in just a few short paragraphs, we've covered a lot of ground there. So with that, I'll bring my part to a close, and then we'll open it up. There are some questions for reflection in the chat, so you can check those out about your experience with writing this inventory. And so let's open it up.